Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thanks for having me here. I think from here on out, I'm only going to give presentations if I can stand in front of big, imposing flags. I'm Sara Yaffe. I'm from MASS LBP in Toronto. I'm just going to get it right out there. LBP stands for Led by People. MASS has been around for 18 years, born out of the BC Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform, British Columbia. We are Canadian. We have run over 50 citizens assemblies and reference panels in our time, and have sent invitations to over 500,000 Canadians. Let's see if I can do this. Whoa. Okay. Here are some of the processes that we have run, taking up topics that you can see here, everything from urban planning, airport noise management, to major policy debates like pharmacare and online harms, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. Here's a few of the policy reports that we have produced over the years. They are all available to view on our website. So I think you've heard a lot over the last day around the deliberative wave. I'm not going to get into it in detail, but what I am going to share is a little bit around three currents, which is one of the ways that we sort of work to help differentiate between the deliberative projects. So we have here three currents or tributaries. Not an oceanographer, don't know if I've got the terminology right there, but in terms of constitutional, that's what we've been hearing about from Art and from the experience in Ireland, where there's a real gap between public and opinion and what any political party can deliver. So to resolve intractable national issues. At a parliamentary level, it's what Jonathan was telling us about around Belgium's model and hardwiring citizen input into existing mechanisms of government. And then we've got the regulatory current, described as unsexy and Canadian, where we use deliberation to help with issues that may or may not be headline news, but that are important to the way everyday people live our lives. And these are issues that are really plentiful, so they allow us to scale up deliberations. These are things like transit, land use, and city planning, housing policy, insurance regulation, and regulating the internet. So here we have the Citizens Assembly on Democratic Expression. I'm going to continue to refer to it as CADE, which is what we call it here. CADE was an example of a regulatory assembly and around the issue of internet regulation, which is a really fast evolving policy space with many different trade-offs to navigate. So in fact, actually, from the initial discussions around starting the assembly to the kickoff of the first meeting, the policy space was changing very quickly. So just to give a bit of a background, in 2021, the Canadian government released a first attempt at a bill focused on addressing online harms. And that approach took from Germany's network enforcement law and proposed an approach that would focus on quick mandatory takedowns of hate speech and many other forms of harmful speech. And it was really poorly received because it was seen as an overreach, it was seen as too limiting to free speech and too focused on surveillance and censorship. So the government went back to the drawing board and set up the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression, which was chaired by a leading academic and a retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And the commission was mandated to better understand, anticipate, and respond to the effects of new digital technologies on public life and Canadian democracy. And as a complementary process, the government also initiated a 3-year National Citizens Assembly, the Citizens Assembly on Democratic Expression. All of that was run through an arm's length think tank called the Public Policy Forum. So that you can see the sort of the ways that these pieces work together here. I'm going to talk. Yeah, okay. So the assembly was mandated to learn about the issues, deliberate on potential solutions, and provide recommendations to the Commission, to the federal government, and to the Canadian public. And it was, as I mentioned, a 3-year process, so sort of serialized, and it got was meant to get started in 2020, which, as we all know, was a difficult year. So it initially intended to be entirely in person, became entirely online. This is a slide that sort of demonstrates what the process ended up looking like, and it ended up being conducted over 18 sessions, 34 meetings. Canada's a big country. We have 6 time zones and 2 official languages. That was the first year of it. Here's a photo of the fully online version. In the second year, we were able to come together, but we did more of a hybrid process. So a few sessions online, and then we brought everyone together to Ottawa, our nation's capital. You can see people together, but spaced and in masks. And then in the final year, we were able to fully come together and sit side by side as we're doing today. I'll just say a few things about some of the details here. This is an example of the letter that was sent in 2021 for our civic lottery, which is our recruitment process. Over 12,000 letters were mailed. More than 600 volunteers replied. And this is what the makeup of that assembly looked like. So representation from every province and territory, and then around other categories, age, housing. And then at the bottom there, you can see Indigenous, First Nations, Métis. So we had 5 representatives from that category, as well as we had to make sure that we had, because it was a national project, a Francophone representation. So almost a quarter of the members were Francophone, and people of color as well. I'm just going to talk for a moment here about our civic concierge, and you heard Lynn mention this a little bit yesterday. This is part of the MASS special sauce of delivering a project, and this is one of our former colleagues, Abby, there, from a different project that we ran called Our Care, but the premise applies. And really, what I'll share on the right is one of the panelists, Naima, there with her child. She had a young child who she brought with her, obviously, and her husband to take care of that child during all of the long days and sessions. And he celebrated his first birthday during the process. So part of the duties of our civic concierge was to make sure that A, Naima and her family were well taken care of, and B, that there was a cupcake available for the celebration of that birthday. Our civic concierge team works really hard to make sure that every panelist feels as able and supported to participate in the process as possible. This is just to demonstrate that, as you've heard, I think already, half of our time is really spent learning, half of it is in deliberation, and we bring in experts to speak with the panelists, to engage with the panelists, so that they really do get to hear from them, but then enter into conversation with them, so that there is citizen expert dialogue. You can tell these are experts because they're all wearing glasses. And then one other thing I wanted to say on that, and this came up yesterday, is that one of the pieces of the learning program that we are starting to do more and more is to include an AMA, an Ask Me Anything type session towards the end of the learning program, or sort of halfway through the deliberation, so that panelists can ask all their questions to experts or a couple of people, hear them in conversation with each other, but not in those sessions. The experts aren't doing any presentation. They are just responding to questions. This is an indication. I think Peter's going to talk a little bit more about it later. Maybe not. Maybe I'm going to scoop him. This is sort of an indication of how our process proceeds, and we start by grounding ourselves in values that guide the work throughout. That's a conversation that is not requires no expertise whatsoever, and so it's a great way to start. And then we move into issues, priorities, and recommendations, and we follow a similar sort of process in each of those phases of working to identify the pieces, clustering them together, consolidating, defining, and then reviewing. I believe slides will be shared with you also if you like. Quickly, in terms of impact, so as I mentioned, the assembly influenced the commission, and then there was actually in the third year an expert panel that was created as well. The Citizens Assembly influenced both the commission and the expert panel, and there was sort of a dialogue between the three processes. And then what resulted was a new bill, which has received much better reception and includes many of the recommendations from CADE and from a sister project that I talked about in the workshop yesterday, the Youth Assembly on Digital Rights and Safety, which had a similar focus, but specifically around the needs of youth. So this updated legislation takes more of a risk-based approach and a duty for platforms to act responsibly. And it takes up, as I mentioned, many of the recommendations from the Assembly, including a Digital Safety Commission, an Ombudsperson's Office, as well as more transparency requirements and a shifted approach to ownership of data. And so this is actually a sort of fortunate case, and while there are many other pieces that impacted the shift from one bill to another, we can see that improved policy congruence in the second bill, partly as a result of the work of the assemblies. Finally, I'll just say, whoops, that where regulatory assemblies can be used and are helpful, and what CADE demonstrates that, I think you've been hearing this already, that people can really productively tackle hard technical policy issues. Internet regulation is complex and technical, and everyday people can sit there and understand it and work together on it. That people representing a wide diversity of perspectives and lived experience and political viewpoints can engage in insightful conversation. That people can work together through a thoughtful, deliberative process and find common ground. And that people when they're sitting in a room together, grounded in values, with a common objective, empowered with a mandate to inform government policy, are much more interested in each other and in learning from each other and in working together than they are in fighting with each other. So public deliberation can also be really helpful to experts who sometimes get lost in detail, and almost like a good editor. And then also identifies areas of overlap between, in this case, between the commission and the assembly and the experts, and then those small areas of divergence as well. I think that's it.